The White Lamb's Secrets. It is said, the lamb once stood at the edge of the world, its fleece white as the light before the fall. But time swallows stories, and silence grows where memory dares not tread. No one remembered the name of the guardian who vanished. No one spoke of the gate sealed beneath the hills. And no one dared to ask why the white lamb was chosen to guard the crest of a kingdom. They called it a fable, a lullaby for the restless, a charm to keep the woods still. But the ground remembers. Even now, under green fields and wandering flocks, something sleeps. It dreams not of blood nor fire, but of truth unspoken and names erased. One day, the lamb will stir, and when it does, it will not bleat. It will speak. Part 1. Echoes of the Kingdom. Chapter 1. The Prince Among the Hills. The castle on the hill had no battlements, no watchtowers, no smoke from forges or horns for war. Instead, it had wind, wide wandering wind that carried the scent of wild thyme and wool across the meadows. And it had sheep, hundreds of them, like clouds fallen to earth, spilling over the rolling hills of Lyria like spilled flour. And in the middle of them, sometimes barefoot, always quiet, walked a boy with a silver crook and a crown he never wore. Merrick, son of King Arthur and Queen Elena, heir to the kingdom of the White Lamb. Though you wouldn't guess it, not by the way he crouched beside a newborn lamb in the morning fog, whispering softly to it, as though it could understand. "Don't be afraid," he said, brushing the dew from its trembling wool. "The world's gentler than it looks, sometimes." The lamb blinked at him, still wobbly, still unsure. Much like him. Merrick was 19, now old enough for sword training, for royal audiences, for endless talk of duty. But none of that had ever suited him. Not the jeweled halls, not the endless banquets, not the shadow his father's legacy cast like a banner over every step he took. He was a shepherd more than a prince, and the fields more of a home than the marble corridors of the palace. He liked it this way, most days. But lately the wind had changed. It whispered more. Sometimes, when he walked the upper hills, he could swear he heard a name carried through the grass. A name he did not know, but that stirred something old in his bones. And last night, in a dream, a lamb stood before him with black eyes and whispered in a voice not meant for a child of the throne. "You are not the first. You will not be the last." He woke cold, sweating, the fire dead. Now, crouched in the damp morning light, he looked toward the eastern ridge, where the woods began and the kingdom ended. Beyond that were lands forgotten, stories untold, and secrets, they said, best left buried. But the lambs had begun to stray there. And so, it seemed, had he. The bell at the eastern tower rang once. Morning call, a reminder that court would begin within the hour. Merrick sighed and rose, the crook still in his hand, the lamb now nestled beside its mother. It would live. Not everything did, these days. He made his way up the slope, boots damp with dew, cloak brushing against yellow wildflowers. From this high, he could see Lyria stretched like a tapestry below, low cottages scattered between fruit groves, farmlands bordered by white stone, and at the center, rising clean and pale as the moon, the Palace of the Lamb. Its spires weren't golden or grand. They were humble, carved from ivory-hued marble and capped in silvery gray, meant to reflect light, not blind others with it. His mother insisted it was more than enough. His father, not always. As Merrick stepped through the grazing gates and toward the narrow garden path, a voice called from behind a vine-covered pillar. "You're late. Again." He didn't need to turn to know. It was Lord Roger, his tutor, his father's advisor, and the only man in the palace who could frown while smiling. "The court waits for no shepherd, Your Highness." Merrick brushed a leaf from his shoulder. Then perhaps it's time the court waited for something that actually matters. Roger chuckled under his breath. And what matters then? Sheep? Merrick didn't answer. Not because he didn't know, but because he wasn't sure Roger would understand. Instead, he climbed the path, past the weeping willow that shaded the old statue, weather-worn and half-broken. The statue of a lamb on its knees, head bowed, with words half-faded at the base. To guard the white, to wait the day, to speak when silence falls away. He'd read those words 100 times. But lately, they felt less like a monument, and more like a message. One meant for him. Chapter 2. The Girl Beneath the Alder Tree. The village of Alaris was far from any map worth naming. It lay nestled between two ridges of pine and alder trees, where mist hung low in the morning and the rivers hummed like lullabies. Chickens wandered freely, roofs were thatched with golden straw, and the loudest sound was the wheelwright arguing with his own cart. To most, it was a place the world forgot. To Ilona, it was a place full of hidden things. She sat now beneath the wide-spreading alder near the village's edge, sketching lines into a worn leather notebook with a charcoal stub. Before her sat a cluster of wild mushrooms, dew still clinging to their caps. Red ring, white stalk, spore dust under the edge, she muttered. Not for tea, then. She made a note and turned the page. Ilona was 17, neither child nor grown, not noble, not quite peasant. Her parents ran the apothecary by the mill stream, and while they would have been happier with her learning proper medicine indoors, she preferred wandering, climbing trees, reading the strange old books left in the shop's back shelf, sketching plants no one else cared to name, and, most of all, asking questions. Lately, those questions had started to follow her home. Why did no one ever venture past the elder grove to the east? Why did the village elder wince when she asked about the ruins by the river? And what was that silver symbol she'd found on a broken stone last week, half covered in moss, an engraving of a lamb, circled in ancient letters? She hadn't shown that one to her parents. Not yet. You're always out with your head in the clouds, her mother would say. Better the clouds than the dust, Ilona would reply. Today, though, the clouds felt heavier. The wind was strange cooler, sharp like something had stirred far off. Ilona packed her notebook, stood, and looked toward the forest line. Beyond it lay the old path the hunters didn't use anymore, and a place marked only on the pages of books no one else read. She touched the pendant around her neck, plain, silver, and old. She'd had it since before she could remember. Then she turned back toward home. Tomorrow, maybe, she'd follow the path. Just a little farther. Chapter 3. Whispers in Marble. Merrick stood before the great hall's polished doors, shoulders straight, jaw clenched. The polished ivory stone beneath his boots glinted in the morning sun pouring through high windows. The walls were inlaid with soft gold scroll work and white lamb motifs, gentle reminders of purity, peace, and the long-standing oath of the kingdom. He didn't belong here. The moment he stepped into court, the air shifted. Eyes turned. Not with awe, not even respect, but the cool gaze of advisors and lords who measured him like weight on a scale. His mother, Queen Alina, met his eyes and offered a soft, knowing smile. His father, King Arthur, stood tall in his ceremonial silver cloak, distant as ever, though never cruel. The High Council murmured. Roger stepped forward. Your Majesty, the prince joins us on time enough, today. A few chuckles from the council. Merrick didn't smile. King Arthur's voice carried like stone on still water. Let us begin. Talk began of crops, of border disputes, of a wandering band of traders asking to camp beyond the western wood. Merrick stood silently, fingers twitching at his side. None of this felt real to him, not the silk banners above, not the jeweled staff at the king's side, not even the throne. And then something shifted. An older man in green robes stepped forward. Elder Kalen, keeper of ancient records. There has been, he said, clearing his throat, a disturbance. That got Merrick's attention. Where? The king asked. Kalen bowed slightly. In the upper grazing hills, near the hollow path, shepherds speak of strange sounds beneath the earth. And, he hesitated, there were markings, fresh, symbols we have not seen since before the sealing. The room froze. Silence. Merrick's blood cooled. Have the markings been examined? The queen asked. Yes, your grace. I am preparing an archive match now. But the initial sketch is identical to the crest of the Forgotten Watchers. Another long silence. His father spoke at last. That symbol has not been seen in over a century. It is forbidden, buried. Even buried things can stir, my king. Merrick said nothing, but his mind was racing. The ruins, the lamb statue, the dream. That phrase from the statue returned again. To guard the white, to wait the day. He left before the meeting ended. And no one stopped him. The garden paths twisted behind the palace, like forgotten stories, overgrown hedges, weathered statues, and soft trickling fountains no longer tended. This was the part of the palace Merrick preferred. It didn't ask anything of him. A white butterfly flitted past, wings catching the sunlight. He didn't follow it. He followed the memory of what Elder Kalen had said. The hollow path, symbols beneath the earth, crest of the Forgotten Watchers. He knew the name, not from court records, not from books aloud in the royal library, from his childhood. From the stories the nursemaids weren't supposed to tell. From the dream. He passed the orchard, stepped over the old gate, and mounted his horse in the lower stables. He didn't need a guard, not where he was going. The hollow path wasn't far, a low ridge beyond the northern flocks, where the ground sank in a slow spiral like a forgotten bowl. Locals claimed it was once a quarry. Merrick had always suspected it was older. He reached it by midday. Birds fell silent as he approached. He dismounted, tying the reins loosely to a bent branch. The wind was still, yet the air carried weight like the earth was holding its breath. Merrick crouched at the edge of the hollow. There, scrawled into the damp soil and stone, were symbols, faint, delicate, but deliberate. A circle, encasing a lamb's head. 3 lines beneath it, branching downward like roots or cracks. And at the base, something like an eye, watching. He reached out, fingers hovering just above the mark. And as his shadow touched it, he heard something. Not sound, not wind. A whisper, not in his ears, but in his bones. One word, faint, ancient. Return. Merrick stood up, quickly scanning the trees. No one. No wind. Only the echo of that word, pressing on his mind, like a memory not his own. He took out a bit of parchment and sketched the symbol quickly, then turned to leave. But as he stepped back, his boot hit something hard, not stone, not root. A carved edge, just beneath the grass. He knelt, brushed the earth aside. There, beneath the soil, was a slab, smooth and marked with the same crest, the lamb, the roots, the eye. He stared at it, heart pounding. Whatever this was, it had been buried on purpose, and someone had wanted it forgotten. Chapter 4. Beyond the Grove. The elder grove loomed taller than Ilona remembered. Its trees were twisted and thick-barked, their trunks spotted with moss and time. The villagers often warned children not to pass this line, not because of wolves, or thieves, or anything said plainly, but with a shrug and a muttered, "Just don't." Ilona had never listened well. That morning, she rose before the bell tower rang, packed a satchel with bread, her charcoal notebook, and a flint box, then slipped out the back door without a sound. The silver pendant at her neck felt heavier today, colder. She'd dreamed of a white lamb in the woods last night. It had stared at her. Not afraid, not running, just watching. Ilona reached the base of the oldest tree and placed her hand against the bark. She whispered softly, not expecting a reply. "What are you hiding?" The path beyond twisted downhill, thick with fern and fog. Birds chirped less here. The wind was slow, cautious. She passed fallen stones half buried in soil, broken carvings, possibly ancient. Some showed symbols, smoothed with time. One looked like a star, another a spiral. And then she found it. A ring of standing stones, weathered, cloaked in vine and root, 7 in all, arranged in a circle. In the center was a shallow hollow in the earth, like something had once rested there. Ilona stepped inside. Suddenly, her pendant gave a faint pulse against her chest. She gasped and held it up. The silver warmed to her skin. A faint glow shimmered at its edges, flickering once and then gone. The wind picked up. Leaves rustled. She crouched by the center of the circle and brushed away the dirt. A flat stone plate appeared, faintly carved with the same lamb crest Merrick had seen miles away, a lamb's face, lines spreading below it like roots, and a circle encasing it all. Ilona's fingers trembled. She sketched the design in her notebook. "This wasn't in any of the old village books," she whispered. She glanced around. The air pressed in, not in a frightening way, but like the trees were listening. Then she noticed one of the stones had fallen and cracked, revealing something inside, a hollow core, carved with more symbols. Letters. Ancient script. She tore a page from her notebook and made a rubbing with charcoal. When she stepped back, 3 words had appeared on the paper, their meaning clear despite their age. One watches still. Chapter 5. The Pull of What's Hidden. Merrick paced the tower library, a parchment of the strange crest laid before him. Books lay scattered, many unopened. The royal archives were filled with volumes on grain taxes, treaties, and ceremonial etiquette, but precious little on the ancient past. He tapped his fingers restlessly, then reached again for the rubbing he'd made of the stone slab. The circle, the lamb, the roots, the eye. "Forgotten watchers," he muttered. "Why is no one talking about this?" The whisper still echoed in his memory. "Return." He couldn't sleep the night before. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the buried crest glowing, then sinking beneath water. A lamb watched him from the shore, but its eyes were like mirrors. He didn't tell his father, not yet, not until he knew more. Instead, he pulled his cloak over his shoulders, tucked the parchment into his tunic, and made for the western gate. If the answers weren't in the books, he would find them in the land itself. Far from the castle, in the village of Ilaris, Ilona sat beneath the candlelight of her family's cottage, staring at the paper she had taken from the stones. One watches still. She flipped back through her notebook, dozens of sketches, symbols, and observations from the Elder Grove. Her heart buzzed with more questions than answers. What did the watchers guard? Why her pendant? And why now? Her grandmother shuffled in from the kitchen with tea, but paused when she saw the notebook. "You went past the Elder Grove again, didn't you?" Ilona nodded slowly. "I had to." Her grandmother sighed, then sat beside her. "I hoped you wouldn't feel the pull. Not yet." Ilona looked up. "You know something, don't you?" The old woman didn't answer for a long while. Then she reached out and touched the pendant hanging from Ilona's neck. "That belonged to your mother," she said softly, and before her, to someone who was never meant to be forgotten. Ilona blinked. "What do you mean?" But her grandmother shook her head. "Not yet. When the time is right, you'll understand. Just remember this, not every secret should stay buried." That night, both Merrick and Ilona stood alone, beneath the same moon, miles apart. But both watched the stars, both holding symbols they didn't understand, both wondering what it meant to be watched and chosen. Chapter 6. The Choice to Leave. The morning mist clung to the cobblestone courtyard as Merrick tightened the leather straps on his satchel. He wasn't running away, not exactly, but he wasn't asking for permission either. The sun hadn't risen yet, and only the old steward, Bram, stood in the outer corridor of the stables, watching him with a faint crease in his brow. "You've never been the kind to rise before the rooster," Bram said. "I'm not running," Merrick replied calmly. "I'm searching." The steward didn't argue. He stepped closer, then slipped a wrapped parcel into Merrick's hand. "Then take food. And this." He pulled out a bronze medallion marked with the royal seal. Merrick shook his head. "If I use that, people will know who I am." "And maybe they should," Bram replied. "Not every king is crowned from a throne. Some are shaped by the road." Merrick said nothing. He mounted his horse, nodded once, and rode out through the old gate, the one that hadn't been used since the time of his grandfather. The kingdom was waking behind him, but something older waited ahead. In Alaris, Ilona packed in silence. Her grandmother had given her no more clues, only a single object wrapped in cloth and sealed with wax. "When the sun touches the hollow stone," she'd whispered, "you'll know when to open it." Ilona hadn't dared peek inside. She stuffed it between her journal and satchel of dried herbs. Her heart pounded with a strange mix of terror and excitement. She wasn't a warrior. She wasn't a noble. She wasn't anyone that mattered in the old songs. But still, something called to her. She stepped outside, the village quiet, the grass still wet with dew. A few early risers waved, but no one asked where she was going. She passed the elder grove one more time and knelt beside the standing stones. She laid her hand on the earth where the ancient crest had appeared. "I don't know what you want from me," she whispered, "but I'm going to find out." She turned and walked west, toward the hills that marked the edge of the known map. Elsewhere, far above both of them, hidden deep in a crumbling tower, cloaked in ivy and forgotten spells, a mirror flickered to life. It was not glass, but stone polished to such smoothness that it caught reflections of people who had never stood before it. And in that mirror, two images shimmered. A boy on horseback, riding fast toward the wilds, and a girl with fire in her steps, walking into a fog-laced path. A voice, no longer young, no longer bound, whispered to no one. "They have chosen. Let them find what was lost. Let them wake the lamb." That night, in opposite corners of the realm, Merrick and Ilona both found shelter beneath the trees. They slept with maps half read and dreams they could not explain. And neither knew that their paths, once so far apart, would soon collide. In the ruins of what was once the Watcher's Hold. The sky over the White Lamb Kingdom bled violet and silver. Merrick stood alone on the western tower balcony, the wind tugging at his cloak. The city below slowly yawned to life. Bakeries stoked morning fires, guards changed post, and bells rang softly for prayer. It should have been a peaceful morning. But something felt wrong, or perhaps unfinished. His hands clenched the rail. "Why won't anyone talk about it?" he muttered aloud. He had uncovered a crest buried in stone, a symbol older than the kingdom itself. He had heard whispers in his dreams, felt the tremble of something ancient brushing against his soul. And yet, the court only talked about harvests and trade. He turned and descended the stairs, each step firmer than the last. Today, he wouldn't wait for permission. The mystery called too loudly. He entered his room and began packing. Just the essentials: dried fruit, a small knife, a bedroll, charcoal sticks, and blank parchment. He hesitated over the sword above his hearth, but took it, not for battle, but for memory. It had belonged to his mother. As he strapped the blade across his back, his door creaked. Bram, the aging steward, stood in the frame with a candle. "Thought I might find you here," the old man said. "There's a look in your eye, same one your father had before the old wars." Merrick didn't pause. "Do you think I'm wrong?" Bram shook his head. "No, but roads like this don't come back the same way twice." He handed Merrick a worn leather satchel. Inside, wrapped in cloth, was a small compass carved with the sigil of the White Lamb, but older, wilder, as if etched before the sigil had ever become royal. Merrick met his eyes. "Where did you get this?" "Your mother," Bram said quietly. "She never told me where it came from, only that it pointed to more than direction." Ilona fastened her cloak as the fog rolled through the village of Ilaris. Her breath rose in white curls as she stepped beyond her doorstep. Few villagers were awake. Fewer still would ask where she was going. She was always wandering. But this time, she wasn't coming back so soon. The package from her grandmother lay deep in her bag, sealed with wax, bound in faded cloth. She hadn't opened it yet. Some part of her was afraid. Instead, she focused on the trail ahead. She turned west, past the stone wall that ringed the grove, her boots pressed into damp grass, dew clinging to the hem of her dress. At the edge of the elder grove, she paused. The trees stood like sentinels. Shadows hung long between them. But now she didn't fear it. Not since the pendant had glowed in that stone circle. Not since she'd uncovered the crest. Something is watching. But maybe it's waiting too. Ilona laid her palm on one of the stones and whispered, "I don't know what this is yet, but I won't let it stay forgotten." She stepped beyond the grove and into the forest paths few dared to walk. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with anticipation. Far to the north, in a long abandoned sanctuary, buried beneath root and ruin, a bell rattled where no wind blew. A withered hand, cloaked in robes of dust and moth-eaten velvet, touched a circle carved in stone. The circle flared faintly, like something stirred behind it. 2 threads pulled, croaked a voice like stone breaking. And so the tapestry begins to unravel. The watchers sleep no longer. Candles flickered across old relics, bones, pages, symbols etched in forgotten tongues. The voice whispered again, "Let the children come. Let them chase what was buried. Let the white lamb bleed." That night, Ilona made camp in a hollow beside a stream, her fire small and flickering. She read her journal again and again. Her thoughts swirled. That same crest, the lamb surrounded by lines and roots, showed up again and again in her dreams. She did not know the boy who rode through the hills miles away, but she had dreamed of him once. A face in shadow, a sword that did not shine, but pulsed. And across a ruined bridge, the echo of a lamb's cry in the dark. Merrick, farther south, lay beside a low fire, under a crumbling archway in the hills. He'd ridden hard, and only now let his horse graze. He too dreamt. A white field, a circle of standing stones, a girl standing in the center with eyes like firelight on water. Neither knew it yet, but they were dreaming of each other. And somewhere, ancient eyes opened. End Part 1. Echoes of the Kingdom. Part 2. The Threads Awaken. Chapter 7. Whispers in the Wood. The path beneath Ilona's feet grew narrower the deeper she walked. The trees pressed close, their branches arcing overhead like cathedral beams. Moss clung to every stone, and the stream beside her whispered words she couldn't quite understand. Not far now, she told herself, trying to believe it. She had followed the path for 3 days. Her boots were soaked, and her cloak was fraying at the edges. But something kept pulling her forward. The pendant around her neck had begun to warm whenever she took the right path, almost like it was pointing for her. She hadn't seen another soul. That was until dusk. As she entered a grove where no wind blew, she found the ruins of a tower crumbled stone, overgrown with ivy and thorn. The only sound was the creak of wood and the low groan of something deep beneath the ground. Etched into the stone beside the archway was the crest again. The white lamb. But this one was different. Its head was lowered, and something shackles wrapped around its legs. She reached toward it, and her pendant flared with light. A gust of wind swept through the clearing, and then behind her a voice. "You shouldn't be here." She spun, dagger half drawn, only to find a boy not much older than her, hooded and half soaked, leaning against a tree. He looked surprised to see her too, but before either could speak further, the ground beneath them shuddered. Chapter 8. The Sigil Beneath. 2 days earlier, Merrick had crossed a ridge into the wildlands, marked no man's land on old kingdom maps. He traveled lightly now, just the horse, the satchel, and the old compass Bram had given him. The needle spun wildly every time he neared the hills. There was something strange in the air, as if the ground itself was alive. The compass finally locked, just as he reached a lone oak, older than the rest of the forest. There, carved into its roots, was a broken stone slab. He cleared the moss, revealing only part of a crest, the tail of a lamb, and a sunburst behind it, the same markings from his dream. He sat back, frowning, then noticed something buried deeper. He dug for an hour until he found it. A metal ring, a sealed chamber door, beneath the tree. He tugged at it with all his strength. It didn't budge. But as the sun set, he noticed something glowing along the edges, faint runes in a circle. He traced them with his fingers and whispered, "Open." They didn't, but the door pulsed once beneath his palm. And somewhere, far away, a girl's pendant lit up. Chapter 9. The Dream That Found Them. The stars blinked awake above the ancient grove, watching silently from beyond the mist. The ruins whispered to themselves, as though remembering voices long since gone. Ilona hadn't meant to fall asleep. She had meant to keep watch. But exhaustion wrapped around her like a heavy cloak, and soon her head dipped to the side, resting against a moss-covered stone. In her dream, she stood barefoot in a field of snow-white wool. Thousands of lambs grazed peacefully, silent, too silent. Not a single sound came from them, and not a single bird flew above. Then the silence broke. A lamb lifted its head. Its eyes were not soft. They were golden and bright, like fire reflecting off water. "He comes with the key," it said. Suddenly, the sky cracked open, and a figure stepped through a shattered veil, not walking, but drifting like a shadow with weight. It wore a crooked crown, and its face was smoke. The lambs scattered. The golden-eyed one turned to her and whispered, "He dreams too. Find him before the veil breaks." Ilona jolted awake. Across the grove, the boy from earlier had also fallen asleep, leaning against a fallen pillar. His breathing was slow, calm, but his fingers were twitching, and a crease formed between his brows. He was dreaming too. In his dream, Merrick stood atop the balcony of the White Lamb Castle, but the sky above was black, not blue. The lamb banners that normally waved in the wind now hung limp and torn. The kingdom was silent. He turned and saw the stone circle from his earliest dream. In the middle stood a girl, her back to him, hair glowing like sunlight through leaves. She held something in her hands, a pendant, glowing with the same symbol carved into the ruins he had found. He stepped forward. "Wait," he called. "Who are you?" But the sky above shattered like glass, and the dream twisted. He now stood in a forest of mirrors, and his reflection was not his own. It was wearing armor he had never seen, and its eyes were filled with gold. Then the girl's voice echoed from everywhere at once. "You must remember, you have the key." Merrick gasped awake, sweat clinging to his neck. Across from him, the girl was already standing, watching him. For a moment, neither spoke, just breathing. Then, "You were in my dream," Ilona whispered, blinking slowly. "You were in mine," Merrick said at the same time. They both paused again. "I don't know what this is," Ilona said carefully, "but I've been following a trail, a crest, a secret no one talks about." "So have I," Merrick replied, standing now. He reached into his satchel and drew out the old compass. She reached under her cloak and lifted the glowing pendant. Both bore the same symbol. "I think," Ilona said, heart pounding, "we were meant to find each other." The wind stirred around them, rustling through the trees, as if in agreement. Far above, one of the ancient ruins let out a low, rumbling hum, like a lock shifting deep beneath the earth. Ilona stepped forward slowly, her pendant still glowing faintly in the low light of dawn. Merrick held the compass out flat in his hand, watching as its needle spun in frantic circles until it froze, pointing directly toward the stone archway behind her. Neither of them spoke at first. There was a gravity to this moment, something both sacred and ancient, like speaking too loudly might wake something older than the kingdom itself. "That arch," Merrick said quietly. "There's something behind it." Ilona nodded. "I've felt it since I arrived, but I haven't dared go further alone." Merrick looked around at the overgrown ruins. "Then we won't go alone." They walked side by side into the crumbling remains, stepping over roots that had broken through stone, and ducking beneath branches that hung like the fingers of forgotten time. They passed walls etched with symbols neither could read, stars and flames, lambs and chains, a crown split in two. Then they reached a courtyard, where a dry fountain stood, its base carved into the shape of a kneeling lamb. Around its neck was a broken collar, and behind it, half covered by ivy, was a weather-worn plaque. Ilona brushed it clean with her sleeve. Merrick read aloud, "To bind the lamb is to bind the sun. To shatter it is to unmake the light. To bind the lamb is to bind the sun. To shatter it is to unmake the light." They both stared at the inscription. "What does that mean?" Ilona asked, half to herself. "I don't know," Merrick admitted. "But I've seen that lamb before, in dreams, in books nobody talks about, and once, in the forbidden wing of my father's library." Ilona looked at him sharply. "You're from the kingdom?" Merrick hesitated, then nodded. "Merrick, son of King Arthur and Queen Alina." Ilona blinked. "Prince Merrick." He gave a small, sheepish smile. "Just Merrick is fine." She paused. "Ilona, from Alaris. I'm not really anything important." "You are now," Merrick said. They stood in silence, two lives that had moved separately for 19 years, finally standing in the same place, caught in the same strange web of fate. Suddenly, Ilona stepped back. "Wait, do you hear that?" Merrick turned his head. At first, there was only wind. But then, footsteps, slow, heavy, not theirs. And from beyond a broken gate, a figure began to emerge, cloaked in bark, vines, and moss. A face hidden beneath a carved wooden mask, its voice raspy and low. "You should not be here," it said. "Who are you?" Merrick asked, stepping in front of Ilona. The figure tilted its head. "The forest remembers. The lamb was broken here." And then, just as quickly, the figure turned and vanished into the trees, without a single sound. Ilona gripped Merrick's arm. "What was that?" "I don't know," he said, "but I think our search just began." Above them, the sky darkened slightly, and a single white feather drifted down from nowhere, landing at Ilona's feet. Chapter 10. The Mark Beneath the Roots. The silence that followed the cloaked figure's departure, was somehow heavier than before. The trees didn't sway. The wind didn't whisper. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Ilona stared at the place where the figure had vanished. Did it say, "The lamb was broken"? Merrick nodded, still gripping the compass. That's the second time we've heard that phrase. First the plaque, now this. He turned the compass slowly. The needle pointed not toward the ruins anymore, but toward a tree at the courtyard's edge, a crooked old trunk half swallowed by stone, roots crawling down over ancient steps. Ilona's voice was quiet. It's pointing to something underground. They exchanged a glance, then moved toward the tree. As they pushed the thick vines aside, Merrick's fingers brushed against cool metal. A handle, rusted, nearly hidden. Ilona stepped back as Merrick pulled. With a loud groan, the stone door beneath the roots slid open, revealing a dark, narrow stairwell spiraling downward into the earth. Cold air rushed up like breath from a sleeping cavern. Ilona lit a torch. Merrick gave her a half-smile. Brave enough? Curious enough, she replied. They descended together, the only sound their careful footsteps and the occasional drip of unseen water. The walls were carved, not in words, but in scenes. Lambs chased by shadow, a circle of stars, a white gate wrapped in chains. At the bottom of the stairwell, they found a circular chamber with 7 pedestals, each holding a broken relic, a shattered blade, a piece of a crown, a wilted flower, a cracked mirror, a feather scorched at the tip, a chain, and finally, a stone tablet. Ilona stepped forward and wiped the dust from it. As she did, glowing letters began to etch themselves into the stone. 7 truths forgotten, 1 secret sealed. The lamb bore the burden, the heirs must reveal. When flame meets feather and stone splits the sky, the white lamb will rise, or the kingdom will die. Merrick's torch dimmed. Heirs, he muttered, plural. Ilona looked up slowly. You don't think that we're part of that? He finished, frowning. Ilona took a deep breath, looking around at the relics. It said 7 truths. These must be the keys. She touched the cracked mirror. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the chamber shuddered, faintly, but enough to make dust fall from the ceiling. From one of the walls, a small piece slid aside, revealing a narrow tunnel beyond. This place is alive, Merrick whispered. Or it's waking up, Ilona added. Torch in hand, she stepped into the newly opened passage. Merrick followed. They emerged into a chamber filled with soft green light. Moss clung to the walls, but in the center stood a pedestal. On it, a book bound in silver and white hide. The crest of the lamb gleamed across its front. Ilona touched it gently. This is no ordinary book. Merrick read the title aloud. The Songs of the Shepherds. Songs? She asked. In the old tongue, that sometimes meant prophecy. Ilona opened the book to the first page. It was written in flowing script neither of them had seen before, but somehow, as they looked at the words, they understood them. And the first line read, When the prince who bears no crown walks beside the girl who carries stars, the hidden gate shall stir once more. They both stepped back, startled. That's us, Ilona said quietly. Merrick nodded, his throat dry. From behind them, a faint voice echoed down the stairwell. You should not have found this. They turned, but no one was there. Only the rustle of something watching from the shadows. Chapter 11. Beneath the Hollow Crown. The chamber darkened as the voice faded. Merrick spun toward the tunnel. Someone's here. Ilona closed the Book of Shepherds and clutched it tightly. We need to move. Now. They hurried back through the narrow tunnel, but it felt longer than before. The glow of the moss had dimmed, and each echo of their footfalls felt answered by one more, just behind them, out of sync. By the time they reached the stairwell, the passage behind them had sealed shut, no crack, no seam, just stone. How? Ilona breathed. Merrick didn't answer. He gripped the torch tighter and started up the steps. But halfway up, they stopped. At the top of the stairwell, blocking the exit, stood a tall figure, robed in black and green, with a mask carved of ashwood, smooth and eyeless. It said nothing, but its presence filled the narrow stairwell like smoke. Ilona's voice shook. "Is it the same one from before?" "No," Merrick whispered. "This one's taller." Suddenly, the figure raised one arm, not in attack, but in warning, and it spoke with a voice like leaves crushed underfoot. "The lamb's secret is not yours. Turn back or be marked." "Marked?" Merrick stepped forward. "We didn't come here to steal anything. We're trying to understand what happened. Why the kingdom forgot." The figure tilted its head slowly. Then it reached behind itself and drew out a small object wrapped in bark and twine. It tossed it down the stairs. It landed at Merrick's feet, a fragment of white stone in the shape of a lamb's ear, burned at the edge. Ilona gasped. "What is this?" she asked. But the figure was already gone, vanished, as if it had never been there. They ascended the rest of the way and stepped back into the ruins' courtyard. The sun was now high in the sky, though neither of them had felt the passage of hours. "We need to leave," Ilona said. "This place isn't safe anymore." "No," Merrick said, looking down at the stone ear in his hand. "It never was. But we were meant to find this." He turned the piece over and found something carved on the back. A symbol, 2 branches crossing, forming a star. Ilona pulled out her pendant. It shimmered faintly again, as if resonating with the mark. "I think this is just the first piece." That night, they camped by the stream not far from the ruins. Neither could sleep. And both dreamed. Merrick's dream. He stood in a great hall of silver pillars, beneath a shattered throne. At its base lay a broken crown, bleeding light into the cracks of the stone. Then, a voice, soft and familiar. He was never meant to lead, only to guard. Merrick turned and saw a white lamb standing at the edge of the hall, glowing faintly. Its eyes were dark as stars, and then it opened its mouth and roared like a lion. Ilona's dream. She wandered through fields of white flowers under a night sky where the stars sang. One by one, the constellations fell, becoming people cloaked in silver, their faces hidden. "You are the bearer of the key," one whispered. Another said, "But not the lock." The last one touched her pendant and whispered, "You must choose when to open it, or never at all." Then she awoke. Ilona sat upright, breath shaky. Across the fire, Merrick did the same. "You had one too?" he asked. She nodded. "We're not imagining this." Merrick tossed more wood onto the fire, watching the sparks rise. "Then we keep going," he said, "and we find the rest." Ilona hesitated, then looked at the broken lamb ear stone. "What if we're not supposed to?" Merrick met her gaze. "Then why did it find us?" Chapter 12. The Silence in the Hall. In the upper halls of the White Lamb Palace, where the marble windows filtered gold and pale blue light into long corridors, Queen Elena stood at the eastern balcony, watching the clouds drift over the hills. She had not slept well. Her hand rested lightly on the carved stone rail, fingertips tracing the shape of the lamb crest. It had always been a symbol of peace, but for days now, peace had felt like a thin veil. Behind her, the great doors creaked open. "You're up early," came King Arthur's low voice. Elena didn't turn. He didn't come back last night. Arthur joined her at the railing. He was dressed already in his ceremonial dark green cloak, though the court would not gather until midday. "He's 19, he said gently. "Not a child. Likely wandered off to the glens again. He's done it before." "Yes, but this time feels different." She turned to face him. "He's been restless, searching for something." The king's jaw tightened slightly. He was always drawn to old stories. "You think he's following one?" "Not just that. I think something is calling him." Arthur looked out at the hills, where the morning mist clung stubbornly to the grass. Even if that's true, he needs to learn to rule, not chase shadows. And yet, Alina whispered, shadows are part of what rules us. There was silence between them. Then she added, I had a dream last night. I saw a lamb standing in a field of stars, but it was weeping, and it had no eyes. Arthur frowned deeply. Dreams, shadows, secrets. He exhaled slowly. It always returns to that cursed tale. Not cursed, Alina replied, just unfinished. Later that day, as servants passed through the halls, carrying baskets of linens, and court messengers gathered in the gallery, a folded piece of parchment arrived for Queen Alina. No seal, no sender. She opened it cautiously. There were only 4 words. The roots remember everything. Her hand trembled slightly. Merrick, she whispered. She folded the note and turned toward the hall. Prepare the horses, she told the guard. I'm going to the glens. Chapter 13. Denial of the Woods. They head back to the village similar to Ilaris, which was also named Ilaris. The night deepened over this Ilaris, the stars dim and distant behind wisps of cloud. Crickets hummed in the underbrush as the woods held their breath, as if something had stirred after years of sleep. Ilona sat near the fire behind her cottage, staring into the flicker. She couldn't shake the feeling that the stranger, Merrick, carried a thread tied tightly to her own. Yet it wasn't just him. Something else was coming. Or rather, someone. A faint rustle came from the edge of the woods. She turned, not alarmed. She already knew who it would be. He always arrived this way. From the trees stepped a young man in a dark green tunic, a leather satchel over his shoulder, and dried mud up to his knees. Denial. His hair was tousled from the wind, eyes focused and quiet. He gave her a brief nod before lowering himself onto the stone beside her. He never said anything. He couldn't. At least, not with words. But he never needed to. Ilona passed him a cup of warm broth, and he accepted it without hesitation. You've been gone longer this time, she said softly, her voice low so the night wouldn't carry it too far. Denial gave a small shrug, then reached into his satchel and pulled out a weathered scroll, frayed edges, ancient markings. He placed it between them. Ilona tilted her head. Where did you get this? Denial simply pointed west, toward the edge of the old hills. He then tapped twice on the sigil drawn in the corner, 2 twisted branches curling around a broken crown. Her eyes widened, the same as the one on her pendant, and the one the stranger carried, hidden beneath his cloak. You know about him, don't you? She asked. Denial met her gaze. His silence said yes. You've been watching. He didn't look away. Ilona leaned closer to the scroll, trying to make sense of the markings, but it wasn't in any script she'd ever seen. Denial tapped one corner, then another, then drew an invisible line between the symbols. A trail, a map. She realized he'd already studied this, probably for years. You've been searching longer than I knew, she whispered. He nodded. His fingers, though calloused and scarred, moved with care as he traced the sigil again. Then, slowly, his hand hovered near her pendant. You think I'm part of this? Denial didn't answer. He didn't need to. She looked back into the flames. Then we'll need his help too, the prince say. Denial's expression darkened just slightly. Not jealousy, not quite, but concern. He had always looked out for Ilona. He always would. Still, he nodded. Whatever path lay ahead, he would walk it beside her, silent as the trees, sharp as the wind. End of Part 2. The Threads Awaken. Part 3. Crossing Paths. Chapter 14. The Pact of Three. The next day, Merrick stood at the edge of the woods beyond Alaris, the morning sun just breaching the fog. The parchment he had found days ago was folded in his pocket, its markings still unclear, but the symbols now repeated around him, carved faintly into trees, etched on stones by paths no longer walked. He heard footsteps. Ilona appeared, wearing a traveling cloak. At her side, silent but steady, walked the same figure Merrick had glimpsed the day before, a young man with unreadable eyes and a satchel worn by time. "You came," she said. "So did you," Merrick answered, with a faint smile. Danail watched Merrick closely, not hostile, just wary. He stepped in front of Ilona as they drew near. Ilona raised a hand lightly. "This is Danail. He's quiet. But he's the one who first found the trail." Merrick offered a slight nod. Danail didn't return it, but his gaze flicked to the emblem under Merrick's cloak, the crown and branches. "So," Merrick continued, "we're following ancient symbols and hidden scrolls because we all had the same dream, more or less." Ilona held out the scroll Danail had brought her. Merrick unfolded it beside his own, lining them up. A clear path emerged now, a route that snaked through the southern hills, toward the ruins of something called Caldreth's Hollow. "No record of this exists in my kingdom," Merrick muttered. "And that's saying something." "My village speaks of it only in whispers," Ilona added. "The place where the crown once wept, but no one knows why." Danail tapped a symbol near the hollow. 3 dots encircled a mark shaped like an eye. "What is that?" Merrick asked. Ilona looked at Danail, who opened his satchel again and pulled out something unexpected. A smooth, ivory carving. A lamb, eyes closed, mouth sealed. On its back, the crown and branches. Ilona gently took it, and her breath caught. "This was from my mother's box. I haven't seen one since I was a child." Danail pointed again to the symbol on the map. The ivory lamb fit into it perfectly, as if it were a key. "You've been preparing for this for years," Merrick said to him, now with some awe, "haven't you?" Danail didn't flinch. He simply looked back at Merrick with quiet certainty. "Then let's not waste more time," Ilona said. "We follow the trail." They packed lightly, with Danail guiding them off the common road, through hollow trees, across frost-cracked stones, into lands where only old stories dared linger. For the first time, the threads of past and future were knotted in one place. The prince, the girl with the dreams, and the silent seeker. The trio trekked through the thistle-laced valley at the forest edge, with the hills beginning to rise in the distance. Birds gave brief chirps in the branches overhead, but otherwise the path was still. Danail moved ahead like he had traveled it 100 times, and he had. Every footfall was careful, deliberate. His eyes scanned the rocks and brush with the awareness of someone always expecting to be watched. Merrick leaned toward Ilona. "Does he always do that?" "He's been searching for a long time," she replied. "He doesn't waste movement, or words. Seems like he doesn't use words at all." Ilona glanced ahead. "Only when he needs to." As if on cue, Danail stopped. He knelt by a cluster of moss-covered stones and brushed away the green to reveal an etched circle, not one they'd seen before. 3 overlapping shapes, a lamb, a crown, and a tear. Ilona knelt beside him. "Another sign?" Danail nodded. His fingers hovered above the carving. Then he slowly turned his head toward Merrick. "They are watching," he said softly, his voice low, smooth, a little rough around the edges, like it hadn't been used in days. "We must move faster." Merrick blinked. "You talk?" Danail stood, adjusting the strap on his satchel. "When I must." There was no pride in it, no explanation, just the simple fact of necessity. "Who's watching?" Merrick asked, his tone more serious now. Danail didn't answer right away. His eyes darted to the treetops, then to the distant hill. "Not beasts," he said, "nor men, but old things, things that remember what this path once meant." Ilona shivered slightly, but she didn't waver. "If they remember," she said, "maybe we can find out too." Danail looked at her, then nodded once, a quiet agreement. He stepped forward again, but this time he waited until Merrick and Ilona were beside him before continuing. It was no longer a quiet guide leading travelers. Now they walked side by side, together. Chapter 15. Whispers Beneath the Ashes. The trail sharpened by the hour. What once felt like meadows and ruins now felt like hushed land, watched, windless, worn by time, and untouched by men. Danail hadn't spoken a word since the day he warned them. Not one. He hadn't needed to. His hands gave directions. His eyes told stories. A tilt of his head meant stay low. A raised palm meant stop. A hand over the stone meant listen. For 3 days, they followed him through scattered clearings and tangled forests, through gullies of stone and woods that grew too quiet after sunset. "Do you think he's all right?" Merrick asked Ilona one night, as they sat beside a cold campfire. Danail refused any flames in this stretch of the journey. Ilona nodded slowly. "He's always been this way. Silence is his shelter, his shield. And still, he's the one showing us everything," Merrick muttered. "I spent years training in royal archives. I studied scripts and legends, yet everything I found led nowhere. He seems to know where to go just by the air." Ilona smiled faintly. "Because he listens to the silence. You read books. He reads the land." A branch snapped nearby. They both turned sharply, hands brushing blades and instinct tightening. Danail was gone from camp. "He's scouting," Ilona said calmly. "He never sleeps more than a few hours at a time. He's probably already seen whoever, or whatever, made that noise." But when Danail returned, his expression was different, darker. He gestured for them to follow and led them through a grove of birch, where the trees thinned and the ground dipped suddenly. Beneath layers of ash and charred roots, they came upon ruins. Stone bones of a tower, crumbled, overgrown, half swallowed by time. Carvings still lingered on some of the old bricks, faded lambs, shattered crowns, and a single word scorched into the doorway arch, in a language Merrick only half recognized. "What is this place?" Ilona asked softly. Merrick crouched near the broken entrance. "A watchpost. From before the kingdom split. The emblem," he brushed dust from a cracked tablet, "matches one in my father's restricted collection." Danail didn't answer, but he did kneel by the steps and begin to uncover something buried in the soot. An old blade, bent and rusted. Beside it, a medallion shaped like a crescent moon with a lamb pressed into the center. He stood and held it out. Ilona stepped forward to take it. "You think this is from one of the guardians?" she asked. Danail didn't speak, but he looked her in the eye. Then, for the first time in 3 days, he broke his silence. "This place was burned," he said quietly, "but not by time, by fear." Ilona looked down at the medallion again, now cold in her hand. Merrick stood at the threshold, his fingers grazing the frame of the ruined tower. "Then we're closer than I thought." Far above, in the trees beyond the ridge, a shadow watched. Chapter 16. The Voice That Fades. The next morning, the path climbed into the ridge, where thorns grew too high for deer, and birds refused to sing. The ruins behind them felt distant now, buried not only by ash, but by memory, as if the land itself tried to forget. They followed Danail again, as always, through winding trails that no map could mark. But even Merrick noticed his pace had slowed. He kept glancing ahead, then behind. Ilona finally asked, "Do you see something?" He didn't answer. Not at first. But as they reached a narrow clearing, shaped like a crescent, ringed by blackened trees and eerily still, Danail stopped. He turned to them. "Danger ahead," he said. His voice was gravel-low, almost cracked from disuse, but firm. That was all he managed. Because then, from the center of the clearing, an orb shimmered into existence. It appeared without sound, like it had always been there. A sphere of glass and shadow, spinning slowly mid-air, faint lines of light swirling inside like smoke trapped in crystal. Before Merrick or Ilona could speak, the orb flashed once, a pulse of pale blue. Danail stepped back and grabbed at his throat, stumbling. His lips began to glow faint silver, and before their eyes, they sealed shut, not with thread or blood, but as if the skin itself forgot it had ever formed a mouth. "Danail!" Ilona cried, rushing to him. Merrick drew his blade and stepped toward the orb, but it vanished the moment he moved. Gone. Like it had never existed. Danail staggered against a tree, breathing through his nose, wide-eyed but alert. Ilona tried to examine him, but he waved her off and pointed to the far side of the clearing, toward a twisted tree stump with symbols carved around its roots. "What was that?" Merrick asked, still holding his sword tightly. Ilona looked shaken. It silenced him, with magic. "I've only read of things like that. Curses that steal speech. But they're forbidden, long forgotten." Danail, now calmer, knelt by the markings. He tapped one symbol, then tapped it again. Merrick knelt beside him. "That one looks like a ward rune. Ancient, broken. Maybe this clearing was once a barrier." Ilona joined them, brow furrowed. "Or a warning." They didn't stay long. But the silence that followed them wasn't just from Danail anymore. It was something else now, as if the air itself had learned to whisper without words. Chapter 17. The Chapel of Shadows. The old road they followed narrowed to a forgotten trail, choked by vines and branches that clawed like fingers from the woods. Moss clung to every stone. Fog began to settle low along the ground, not thick, but strange in the way it refused to lift. By midday, they reached it. The chapel stood crooked between two great elms, half buried in ivy, its bell tower broken and leaning eastward like a neck snapped in sleep. Stained glass once decorated its frame, now reduced to jagged shards barely clinging to the arch. A lamb, carved into the worn wooden doors, greeted them, though its eyes had been gouged out. "What is this place?" Merrick asked, brushing leaves from the steps. Danail stepped forward, slowly now, reverent. His fingers touched the doorframe, not like a stranger, but like someone returning. He pushed the door open. The inside was colder than it should have been. Wooden pews lay shattered and scattered across a dust-choked floor. At the far end stood an altar beneath a cracked window. Light fell only in fragments. Symbols and scripture lined the walls, both familiar and not. And behind the altar, near a broken bench, an old satchel, Danail stopped. Ilona stepped closer. "Do you know this place?" she asked gently. He turned, nodded once, then crouched to the floor and pulled a small bundle from beneath loose stone. It was wrapped in tattered wool. Carefully, he unwrapped it, revealing a journal, a half-carved wooden token, and a child's drawing, faded but intact. The drawing was of a boy with dark hair, standing outside the chapel, flanked by two figures, a woman with long braids and a tall man with a staff. A home. "Is this you?" Ilona whispered. Danail looked at her, then turned away and set the picture down gently, facing the altar. Merrick opened the journal. The handwriting began strong, steady, then deteriorated as the pages went on, as if written in fear, with shaking hands. "He's been here," Merrick said, "since he was 13. This was a safe house. Maybe a sanctuary from the kingdom, or something worse." The last readable page read, I saw the lamb in the trees again. It watched me, then vanished. I think it knows I stayed. I think it wants me to remember. But I can't leave. Not yet. They said I had a purpose. I just don't know what it is anymore. Ilona traced the final word with her fingertip. Danae walked to the altar and reached into the hollow behind it, pulling out an amulet, a silver crescent, matching the one from the burned tower. He looked at them both, then pointed to the two medallions now in their hands. Pieces of something larger, Merrick murmured. A key, maybe? Danae nodded again. Then, without speaking, he walked behind the altar and began to brush away moss on the floor, revealing a trapdoor, sealed with an old iron lock, etched with the same symbol they had seen carved throughout their journey: the lamb, the crown, the tear. And above it, scratched into the wood by a child's hand, a name: Danae. Chapter 18. Beneath the Chapel. The trapdoor opened with a reluctant groan, its iron hinges stiff from years of rust and silence. A breath of stale air greeted them, cold, ancient, and tinged with the faintest scent of burned parchment and wax. Danae lit a small lantern from his pack, its glow flickering amber against the stone walls below. He descended first, as if he'd done this before. Merrick followed, sword in hand. Ilona came last, glancing behind her once more at the quiet chapel above, then shut the door gently. The stairs spiraled tightly, cut from stone and uneven with age. Etchings marked the walls, runes, and symbols none of them could fully read, though some resembled the carvings from the ruins and the satchel they carried. When they reached the bottom, the room widened. A stone chamber, circular, no larger than a hut. Shelves lined the walls, filled with decaying scrolls, broken relics, and bottles of dried ink. In the center sat a cracked table, covered in maps and torn pages. And beyond it, carved directly into the wall, a mural. Ilona gasped. It's the White Lamb. The mural depicted a great lamb, glowing faintly even in the dark. Below it, a crown. Around it, flames, weeping trees, and figures in robes kneeling in prayer. But near the bottom, the lamb's face was split in two, one side peaceful, the other voided out, with dark ink smudging its eyes. Merrick approached the desk, brushing away dust. These maps are of the region, he muttered, but they show tunnels, hidden ones. This chapel sits over something ancient. Danae moved to a chest beneath the mural. The lock had already been broken years ago. Inside, Ilona found documents wrapped in red string, a leather-bound book, and something much newer, a mirror, no larger than her palm, framed in silver. She lifted it gently. The glass shimmered, then shifted. A face appeared in the mirror, not her reflection, but a robed figure in darkness. It whispered, "The Watchers still remember, and the sealed must not awaken." Startled, she dropped it. The mirror did not shatter, only dimmed. Merrick turned sharply. "What was that?" "A warning," Ilona whispered. Danae stared at the mirror with hollow eyes. His hand moved to his throat, then he clenched his fist. He gestured to the wall, at the part of the mural with the voided lamb. He took a piece of chalk and wrote in rough script on the desk. "It comes from below. I was told to guard the seal. I failed." The chamber trembled faintly. Merrick stepped back. "Something's down there." Danae pointed to a passage hidden behind loose stones near the back of the room. Faint wind flowed from it, not natural, not right. Ilona looked at them both. "Do we go?" "We have to," Merrick said grimly. "The truth is never buried forever." And with that, they stepped deeper into the dark, toward the place even the lamb once feared to tread. Chapter 19. Shadows over the Kingdom. In the kingdom of the White Lamb, the bells had not rung in weeks, yet there was a tension in the air, like the pause before thunder. Courtiers moved through the marble halls more cautiously, speaking in lower voices. Wordless glances passed between guards. Something was missing. Prince Merrick was gone. At first, it was brushed off. A diplomatic outing, perhaps a retreat into the forests he loved. But when his personal guard returned alone and confused, the council grew restless. King Arthur stood on the balcony of his throne room, looking out over the kingdom that bore the lamb's crest on every flag. His fingers gripped the railing tightly. Queen Elena sat behind him, holding a sealed letter. They had both read 3 times. It was unsigned. Only a single line written in bold strokes. The silence beneath your throne is growing louder. Do not ignore it this time. Elena's eyes darkened. You don't think he's looking for it? I trained him better than that, Arthur muttered. But the blood in our line remembers. We never told him what we found. No, but sometimes secrets call even when no one speaks them. Elaris, the village between the trees. Far across the valley, the village of Elaris basked in the fading gold of late afternoon. Thatched roofs, cobbled paths, and quiet homes surrounded by farmland gave the illusion of peace. But the village elder, Old Wren, stood outside the healer's hut with a furrowed brow. A child had fallen ill, not just with fever, but with visions. She spoke of a lamb with no eyes, of a field of mirrors, of shadows dripping from trees like wax. She's never left the village, the healer said quietly, and she's never heard the old stories. Wren didn't respond right away. He turned and looked toward the edge of the forest, where a withered stone stood half swallowed by roots. On it, the shape of a crown and a tear had long ago been scratched out. It's beginning again, he said at last. We didn't bury it deep enough. Back at the kingdom. That night, thunder rolled through the hills surrounding the White Lamb's kingdom. A lightning strike lit up the stained glass windows of the royal chapel, and in that brief flicker, the high priest, who was locking up, saw a figure kneeling at the altar. He opened the doors again. The chapel was empty, but the candles, unlit for years, were burning white. Chapter 20. The Hollow Beneath. The passage was narrow at first, barely enough for one at a time. Danielle led, lantern held low, the flame casting eerie shadows that slithered along the rough walls. Ilona followed, keeping one hand on the stone, her other resting near the satchel. Merrick came last, blade drawn, though it felt almost laughable here, like a sword trying to hold back a storm. As they walked, the air grew colder, not the cold of wind or winter, but a bone-deep stillness, the kind that spoke of things left behind. Symbols returned on the walls, older, cruder. Then came the whispers. At first, Ilona thought it was water, a trickling echo. But when they paused, it didn't stop. Words, low and breathy, ancient. She couldn't understand them, but Danail winced as if they scraped at the edges of his mind. They emerged into a vast underground cavern, cut faintly by shafts of unnatural light that filtered down from cracks far above. The ceiling was lost in shadow, but below, a bridge of stone arched over a pit of darkness, leading to a small island at the center of the hollow. Upon that island stood a pedestal, and above it, suspended in mid-air, was an orb. The same orb that had sealed Daniel's mouth days ago. Merrick narrowed his eyes. This place isn't part of any map. Danail pointed urgently to the edge of the bridge, where a sigil had been carved. Ilona bent to look at it. It was the lamb again, but with a ring of fire around its head and chains at its feet. This place. It was meant to imprison something, Ilona whispered. They crossed the bridge slowly, every step echoing louder than the last. Danail suddenly stopped and pressed a hand to the ground. Thump, thump. The stone vibrated, a slow heartbeat beneath the earth. The orb pulsed, Merrick took a step closer. It's reacting to us. Or remembering, Ilona added. The orb flashed, once, and sent a shockwave through the room. The mural on the far wall cracked, revealing a door of pure black stone behind it. Then the whispers ceased. A voice, clear and cold, spoke into the chamber. 3 seek what cannot be found, 1 bound by silence, 1 born of light, 1 fated to choose. They turned toward the door. The orb drifted downward and shattered into dust. Danail fell to his knees, gasping for breath. His voice returned. We were never meant to come here. Chapter 21. Eyes that wander, hands that hide. Far above the cavern's silence, the morning light touched the forest edges near the village of Alaris, where rumors now walked louder than men. Whispers of missing youths, old stories retold in firelit kitchens, dreams that bled into waking life. But none of that mattered to Wren, the old village keeper, as much as the footprints he found in the moss just past the chapel ruins. Fresh, small, deliberate. She's gone, he muttered to himself, and so is the quiet boy. He looked toward the trees. A wind stirred them, but the leaves didn't rustle. Time to wake the old paths. Meanwhile, beneath the earth, Ilona lingered at the edge of the black door, while Merrick and Danail quietly debated what to do next. Her eyes drifted downward, toward the crumbled stone where the orb had shattered. Amid the dust, something glinted, just barely catching the strange silver-blue light filtering through the cracks above. She bent down. It was small, flat, a charm of some kind, circular, etched in fine symbols around the edge, with a center stone that shimmered like both flame and water, and engraved on its back, to protect the second flame. Her heart skipped. There had been no talk of a second anything, no flame in any tale she knew, except the one at the kingdom's founding, the one bound to the white lamb. Quietly, Ilona slid the charm into her satchel. What is it? Merrick asked, looking over. She stood quickly and dusted her hands. Just dust. Let's keep moving. But Danail stared at her, brow furrowed. He had seen her take it. He said nothing. Back at the kingdom, in the candlelit archives beneath the castle, Queen Alina was awake before the bells. Her fingertips skimmed across brittle scrolls, searching, not for Merrick, not yet. She searched for a name she had hoped never to see again. And then, on a page half-burned and water-stained, she found it. The hollow between kingdoms, the one sealed by flame and silence. Her eyes widened. You foolish, brave child, she whispered. You're going there. And far below, in the chamber of chains and ash, the black door began to open on its own. Chapter 23. Echoes Within Stone. The mist in the basin began to fade, the swirling images dissolving into silence. Ilona stood frozen for a moment longer, eyes fixed on the place where her own reflection had burned with fire and loneliness. Then she turned away. Wait, Merrick said, watching her closely. You knew that image was coming. What aren't you saying? Ilona hesitated, just long enough to feel the charm warm in her hand. Then, with a breath, she knelt beside the base of the mirror closest to her and pretended to dig gently at the dust and debris. Her fingers moved carefully. Then, as if stumbling upon it, she held up the glinting charm. I found this, she said aloud, voice steady, back near the orb that shut Danail's mouth. It was buried under the rubble. I didn't want to touch it at first. Merrick stepped closer, frowning as he leaned down. What is it? Some kind of medallion, maybe. It says something about protecting a second flame. She turned it over and held it out for Merrick to see. Danail, silent still, moved with quiet grace to Ilona's side. His eyes locked on the charm, not with surprise, but recognition. He tapped his chest once. Ilona narrowed her eyes. You've seen this before, haven't you? Danail nodded slowly, then pointed toward the wall. With a flick of motion, he brushed his fingertips across a faintly etched symbol, the same as the one engraved on the back of the charm. And then the wall began to hum. It's a key, Merrick whispered, not a warning. No, Ilona said softly. It's both. The wall shimmered faintly, and a seam appeared, so narrow it looked like a scar in stone. The room grew colder, darker, but not just with shadow. With presence. Something behind that seam was waiting. Above, in the forest. Wren had stopped walking. He knelt and brushed aside a fern, revealing a broken pendant, the same type the village once gave to children during their naming ceremonies. He knew this one. It had belonged to Danail, lost long ago. You're not walking alone, boy, he murmured, but I fear what walks beside you. Then he stood, eyes narrowed. He could feel it now. Something old had opened, and not all doors were meant to. Chapter 24. What is carried, what is kept. The wall gave way, without a sound. Stone slid inward, as if inhaling, and a hidden corridor revealed itself, narrow, curved, and lined with deep-rooted vines that had no business growing underground. The air within was warmer than the cavern, and carried a faint, strange scent, not rot, not earth. Something like memory. Merrick led, sword in hand, but lowered. His footsteps were firm, boots scraping lightly on the stone floor. Behind him, Danail moved silently, as always. Ilona brought up the rear, watching shadows flicker on the walls. No one spoke. They had passed through something ancient, and it felt like words didn't belong here. As they walked deeper, Danail's satchel jostled. Something inside shifted, and without warning, the flap came loose. A small bound leather book tumbled out, landing with a muted thud between him and Ilona. Danail didn't notice. Ilona bent quickly, scooping the book into her hands. Her eyes flicked to Danail, but he kept walking, either unaware or unwilling to react. She turned the book over. Its leather was cracked, the binding stitched unevenly with what looked like thread made from reeds. Faded symbols lined the edge, barely legible in the flickering lantern light. No title, no lock, no indication of its meaning. But she felt it hum in her hands. Not magic, not exactly. Like a held breath. She glanced at Merrick, then at Danail's back, and quickly slid the book into her own satchel. Later she whispered to herself, "When we're safe." The tunnel continued downward, curving slightly to the left. Eventually, the tight stone walls began to widen, and the sound of water dripping echoed ahead. The scent changed again. Moss, metal, time. Ilona felt the charm she'd found earlier press against the newly added book in her bag. They were both whispering things she couldn't quite hear yet. And the further they walked, the more she began to wonder. What else is Danail carrying that he hasn't told them? Chapter 25. Ink and Silence. The cave they found wasn't deep, but it was dry. A small alcove with stone walls smoothed by time and a hollow in the middle, perfect for a fire. Vines curled through cracks in the stone above, letting slivers of moonlight seep in. It was enough. Merrick offered to gather wood, taking the lantern and leaving Ilona and Danail behind. "Won't be long," he said, his voice echoing softly as his steps faded into the corridor. The silence he left behind was familiar, but heavier now. Ilona sat near the wall, pulling her knees up as Danail sat nearby, staring into the unlit fire ring with a distant gaze. He hadn't spoken in days, not since the orb silenced him. He didn't need to speak. Not for what was coming next. Ilona reached into her satchel, her fingers brushing the cracked leather of the book. She hesitated, then slowly opened it. Inside, the pages were filled with sharp, slanted writing, not always neat, but full of weight. Drawings, symbols, maps. Some pages were written with trembling hands, others calm. Notes about paths taken, people met, dangers avoided. This isn't just notes, she thought. It's his life. But the deeper she read, the more she recognized something oddly familiar. One page was dated over a decade ago, carefully inked with the words "given to me today" by the woman with the ring of pine. Ilona's breath caught. She remembered that diary. Her village elder used to gift small journals to promising children. She'd even helped hand them out once. One of them had gone to a quiet boy, barely 7, who never smiled. That boy was Danail. As she was about to close it and return it, a loose page slipped free, fluttering down like a falling leaf. Ilona caught it before it hit the ground. And then she froze. It was about her. Her name, her village, her kindness. The page spoke not of missions or secrets, but of feelings, shy, halting words penned like confessions to a future self. I don't know if she remembers me, but I remember her. She spoke to me once when no one else did. I wanted to say thank you. I never could. Then further down. I think I like her. I don't want her to know. Not yet. But maybe, if I ever find my voice again. Ilona slowly looked up and saw Danail watching her. His lips were parted slightly, as if unsure whether to try speaking or not. She started. I didn't mean to read it. I didn't know. It just fell out. Danail didn't move. His eyes flicked to the book, then back to her. And then, he did something Ilona hadn't expected. He nodded. Not out of anger, not shame. Acceptance. She held out the book gently. It's yours, she whispered. He reached forward, took it carefully, and placed it beside him. Still, the silence lingered, not cold, not awkward, just full. Ilona looked away, her cheeks warm. He remembered me all this time. And though no words were spoken that night, the space between them felt closer, not quite closed, but no longer distant. Chapter 26. The page between them. The fire hadn't yet been lit, but the warmth in the alcove had changed. Ilona still sat where she was, her fingers loosely tangled together in her lap. Danail, across from her, had picked up the loose page, the one she'd read, and held it in both hands, smoothing its edges with a care that suggested it had been folded and unfolded many times. I wrote that, he said quietly. His voice startled her, gentle, low, hoarse from disuse, like something old being remembered. You spoke, Ilona breathed. He gave a small nod, his eyes on the page. Only when it matters. The silence stretched again, but this time she didn't rush to fill it. She waited, and slowly, Danail began to speak again, haltingly, softly. The diary was a gift. I didn't know how to talk to people, so I wrote instead. Everything, every place, every face. He paused, then looked at her. I saw you when I was little. You smiled. You didn't even know me. But it stayed. Ilona felt her throat tighten. He looked back at the page. That part, about you, I wrote it when we crossed paths again. You were helping an injured deer in the woods. You didn't see me. I just watched. And I remembered your smile. His words, sparse as they were, struck more deeply than if he'd said 1,000. Ilona didn't know what to say, didn't need to. Instead, she reached out and lightly touched the edge of the diary where it rested beside him. I'm glad you found your voice, she whispered. I didn't, he said. You gave it back. A sound broke the moment, the soft shuffle of footsteps, then a voice echoing gently into the cavern. I'm back, Merrick called, his tone light. And I may have overpacked, found some old crates. Don't ask how far I had to go. He stepped into the light, arms full of firewood, bundled cloth, and dried herbs. His eyes flicked between them, noticing the strange stillness. The way Ilona sat, a little closer to Danail now, the faintest smile tugging at her lips. Did I miss something? He asked, raising an eyebrow with a playful smirk. Ilona looked at Danail, who said nothing, but his gaze held a kind of calm it hadn't before. Just resting, she replied. It's been a long day. Merrick set down the supplies and began arranging the wood. Good, he said, because tomorrow might be longer. The fire sparked to life moments later, and though the night deepened, there was a flicker of new light in the alcove. Some truths whispered, some bridges built, and a page, once hidden, now turned. Chapter 27. Whispers in the Ash. The fire had burned low. Shadows danced across the stone walls like restless spirits, flickering between memory and myth. They had spoken little after dinner. Sleep came slow. Ilona curled near the wall, her head resting against her cloak. Danail slept sitting up, his arms crossed and back to the wall, his eyes closed but not fully at peace. Merrick sprawled closest to the fire, his chest rising and falling with deep, slow breaths. And then the dreams began. Ilona's dream started as light, golden fields, the distant sound of a stream. A voice hummed a lullaby she didn't recognize, but felt like home. She turned to follow it, but the dream shifted. The field withered. The grass crumbled into ash. A lamb stood ahead, white, still, watching her. But when she stepped closer, it bled from the eyes. She gasped. Its wool turned dark. Something whispered behind her ear. The guardian sleeps beneath silence. The lamb was not lost. It was hidden. The earth split open, and she fell. Merrick's dream was fire and frost. He stood in the throne room of the White Lamb's castle, only it was empty, abandoned. The banners were torn. The white marble floors were stained red. In the corner, a door pulsed with golden light. As he moved toward it, his reflection flickered in the polished stone. Only, it wasn't him. It was a boy with hollow eyes and a crown that cracked in half. You bear what your father buried, the boy said. The golden door burst into flames. Merrick reached for his sword, but his hand passed through it like smoke. Danail's dream came slower. He stood in a chapel, the same one they'd seen in daylight. But now it was whole, pure, bathed in blue light. Vines bloomed along the pews, and petals drifted like snow. And in the center was the orb. It hovered, glowed, called. Not yet, a voice whispered. Not Ilona's, not Merrick's, not his own. He stepped forward. But as he did, the chapel cracked. The vines recoiled. The light turned cold. And the orb screamed without sound, a pulse that seized his chest. He tried to cry out, but again his voice failed him. They all awoke at once. Ilona shot upright, gasping. Merrick rubbed his eyes, blinking like he'd run 1,000 miles. Danail opened his eyes last, and though he made no sound, a flicker of knowing passed between the three. None spoke, but each one knew something was coming, something old, and they were closer to it than ever before. End of Part 3. Crossing Paths. Part 4. Seeking the Truth. Chapter 28. The Pact, Unspoken. The morning came in quiet layers of silver fog. The forest around them slept, shrouded in stillness, as though it too waited for what would come next. Merrick stirred first, his cloak damp with dew. He sat up slowly, watching as Ilona tucked the diary back into Daniil's satchel without a word. Daniil, eyes open but silent, gave a faint nod. It was as if they'd all made peace with what had been read, even if it left more questions than answers. For a while, no one spoke. Then Merrick broke the silence. "We can't go back, can we?" Ilona met his gaze. "Even if we did, we wouldn't be the same." Daniil reached into his coat and pulled out something none of them had seen before. A folded, weathered map. The edges were burned, the ink faded in places, but it was real. He laid it out between them. "Where did you get this?" Merrick asked, stunned. Daniil pointed to a small symbol etched near the bottom corner. A white lamb, crudely drawn, circled in a fading ink. It rested beside a winding river and a mark labeled Halgar's Hollow. Ilona leaned in. "That's past the mountain pass. That region's been abandoned since before I was born." Daniil tapped it once, then placed a hand over his chest. He had been there. They packed quickly. Ilona slid the page back into the diary. She didn't speak of what she read, and Daniil didn't ask. But as they moved, a quiet understanding built between them, a bond of unspoken trust. Merrick adjusted the sword on his hip, then tied a cloth over his shoulder, dimming the shine of his insignia. "If anyone asks," he said, "I'm not a prince, just a wanderer named Merrick." Ilona raised a brow. "Merrick?" He grinned. "Short for leave me alone and let me blend in." They smiled, but the weight of what they were stepping into was not lost on any of them. By midday, they reached the ridge that overlooked the distant plains. Far in the distance, they could see the land darken, the edges of Halgar's Hollow. The wind changed there, sharper, carried with it the scent of old fires and forgotten things. "Beyond this point," Merrick said, "we don't turn back." Ilona took a deep breath and stepped forward. Daniil followed. And then Merrick. Together, no words, no vows, they crossed the line between what was known and what was hidden. The pact was made, though none spoke it aloud. But the world heard. And it began to shift. Chapter 29. The Hollow's Watch. The shadows grew longer as the trio pressed beyond the safety of known lands. The path to Halgar's Hollow was no true path at all, just fractured stone, tangled underbrush, and silent warnings whispered by the wind. Birdsong had long vanished. In its place came the low howl of air, threading through bone-dry branches, like breath slipping through teeth. Daniil walked ahead, steps purposeful but cautious. He hadn't spoken since they'd crossed the ridge. He didn't need to. His posture said enough. They were being watched. "This place feels wrong," Ilona whispered, fingers brushing the hilt of her belt dagger. Merrick nodded. "There's history here, but not the kind kept in books." They reached a split in the land, a narrow chasm with jagged stone like broken teeth. A thin bridge of roots and half-collapsed stone stretched across it. Below, only blackness. Daniil didn't hesitate. He stepped onto the bridge, arms slightly out to balance, his cloak catching in the wind like wings. Ilona held her breath until he reached the other side. "We're really doing this," she said to Merrick. "Guess so," he replied, voice low. "Welcome to the point of no return." One by one, they crossed. On the other side, the forest gave way to ancient ruins swallowed by moss. Broken statues littered the overgrown path, worn figures with hollow eyes and lamb motifs etched into their cloaks. Merrick paused at one, running a gloved hand over the crumbling shoulder. "This wasn't just a village," he muttered. "It was sacred. Look at the markings." Ilona traced the symbol with a frown. "Same as the necklace I am wearing." Before he could respond, Daniil raised a hand. His head tilted, eyes narrowed. A soft humming trembled through the air, low, rhythmic, distant. Drums. Not war drums, but ones. Ritualistic, faint enough to feel, not hear. Daniil crouched and gestured to the brush. They followed. Within moments, they reached a clearing lit by the red flicker of an unnatural fire. At its center, a stone altar surrounded by figures cloaked in ash-gray robes. None spoke. They simply circled slowly, hands raised as if offering something to the stone. Upon the altar lay a book, massive, chained, and pulsing faintly with golden light beneath its binding. Merrick drew breath sharply. "The Lamb's Chronicle," he whispered. "It can't be." Ilona gripped his arm. "You know what that is?" He nodded. "It's not just a book. It's the key to all of this." Then, one of the robed figures stopped mid-step. Slowly, its head turned toward the tree line, straight toward them. Chapter 30. The Chronicle's Truth. The three crouched low behind the moss-covered stones, their breathing hushed but heavy. The robed figure's gaze lingered, though its face remained hidden beneath the hood. They all felt the weight of it. But no alarm was raised. Not yet. The figure turned slowly back toward the circle, as if it had sensed something, and dismissed it. Ilona exhaled softly. That was too close. Merrick's fingers gripped the edge of the stone, knuckles pale. His eyes stayed locked on the chained book. "You called it the Lamb's Chronicle," Ilona whispered. "What is it?" He nodded slowly. "It's something my father once mentioned. A relic kept by the ancient watchers of the Lamb. He said it recorded not just history, but prophecy, the rise and fall of kingdoms. Secrets written in it were said to reshape thrones." Ilona glanced toward the circle. "So why is it here? And who are they?" Daniil's gaze didn't waver. Slowly, he raised a single finger and pointed to the symbol etched onto the altar, a white lamb with eyes closed, surrounded by thorned vines. "It's the same," Merrick said, his voice suddenly distant. "That was on the gate beneath our castle, the one that's always locked." Ilona looked at him. "You've seen it?" "Once. I was 10. I asked my father what it was. He said it led to the place where the past was buried. I thought it meant tombs. But maybe he meant secrets." Daniil slowly pulled something from his coat, a page from a book unknown, old, with the same thorned lamb symbol. He handed it to Merrick. "Where did you get this?" Merrick asked. Daniil pointed toward the altar, then toward Ilona. "You think she's connected?" Merrick asked softly. Ilona frowned. "My family's always been in Ilaris. We've guarded the hills, tended sheep, read old prayers. My mother always said we were keeping watch. I thought it was just tradition." She looked down at her pendant. "What if this wasn't tradition?" she whispered. "What if it was preparation?" The chronicle pulsed again, this time brighter, as though it had heard her. Suddenly, one of the figures broke the circle and stepped toward the altar. Its voice, dry and brittle, echoed across the clearing. The chronicle stirs. The silence frays. "We are not alone here." The others stopped. Slowly, all hoods turned toward the trees. As the robed figures advanced, Daniil yanked both Ilona and Merrick backward into the shadows. There was no time to plan, only to move. They ducked low, disappearing into a hidden ridge along the forest's edge as the clearing behind them began to stir with chanting, the air thick with magic and memory. What they had seen, the chronicle, the cult, the symbol, confirmed what they feared. This was never just about myths. This was truth the world had buried. And now it was awake. Chapter 31. The Way Home. The journey back to the kingdom, and to Ilaris, was not quiet. The woods around them had changed, darker, more alert. It felt as if every tree knew what they carried, and every breeze whispered warnings to turn back. But they didn't. They walked for days, silent when they had to be, moving quickly when the path allowed. Daniil still didn't speak, not since the chanting began, not since the chronicle glowed. Ilona glanced at him often. His eyes were clearer now, sharper, like someone who had seen more than anyone should. "He knows something more," Merrick muttered one night as they camped by a dried-up stream bed. "And he's choosing not to say." Ilona looked at the sealed pouch in her satchel, the torn page from the diary. "Maybe he can't," she said. By the time the peaks of Merrick's kingdom pierced the horizon, the sun had started to set. Towers once beautiful now stood shadowed, less comforting than he remembered, as if they too waited for answers. Epilogue: The Watcher in the Hollow. In a forgotten tower beyond the hills, an old man wrote on a scroll of silver thread, "The gate has opened. The lamb stirs." A strange white bird delivered a message. 3 names: Merrick, Ilona, and the Silent One. He looked out at the land as cloaked figures moved in the mist below. "Not all the players have revealed themselves," he murmured. The stars shifted. A wind echoed faintly. "The lamb remembers."